of your colleagues turned up and provided Gillian and I with a key to your property.
Sorry? What? Who? I'm curious who.
I'm not going to tell you that at this stage.
Mr. Organ is the second feature film directed by New Zealand journalist David Farrier, and was by far the best thing I watched in 2023. It's an incredibly reflective and gripping piece of cinema that is seemingly about nothing. Mr. Organ plays out like a psychological thriller where the perceived antagonist is kind of unremarkable, a concept that on paper shouldn't really work.
Like, it's so obvious there's nothing there. It's like he's a fuckwit who bores people to death until they like jump off a building.
However, Mr. Organ absolutely does work, and I think the element that makes the film so unique is the fact that it almost feels like an accident. A narrative that pulls you behind the scenes with Farrier, a film that exposes the nuts and bolts of the filmmaking process as it occurs. And today, I'm going to explore why a film focused on a personality who, according to the director, has the power to bore you to death will do anything but.
The thing is, you can't use my name because he's capable of terrible things, and he's a very dangerous man.
Just a quick bit of admin here. Mr. Organ has had a very strange distribution period. Despite hitting cinemas in the US and New Zealand last year, and now residing on Netflix in those same territories, the rest of the world, including the UK, don't have a legitimate way to purchase it without a VPN. In November, David Farrier said that the film hadn't broken even. So if this video wets your whistle and you're able to, please do consider purchasing a copy on demand or on DVD. Independent cinema can be a bit of a fruitless endeavour, and supporting the existence of these films is probably a good way to ensure they keep getting made. David Farrier's first feature, 2016's Tickled, follows a similar pattern to Mr. Organ. It starts out as a light, entertaining documentary about an online tickling competition and spirals into a much darker story. This style of investigative filmmaking, by its very nature, already includes an element of reflexivity, as we're following the director and his struggles producing the film as the investigation gets more and more bizarre. That personal touch and peek behind the wizard's curtain is inevitable when you're chasing a story that is ongoing. As Farrier says himself, at the time of both releases, the subjects of the documentaries were still out there. It wasn't a closed chapter.
My genre is making documentaries where the bad guy turns up and watches with the audience.
However, I don't think Mr. Organ is the same as Farrier's previous film at all. I would actually say that The Tickle King, a follow-up doc produced by HBO, has more in common with what would eventually become the main terrain explored within Mr. Organ. The subjects of the film turning up to the screenings, disrupting and interacting within the cultural orbit of the documentary that they're featured in.
You're a family guy. There must be a decent part inside of you.
There's a very decent part inside me, I think.
And you might have bitten off more than you should.
Only in Mr. Organ, the filmmaking process was ongoing as these disruptions occurred, putting the director into a bit of a vulnerable position and incorporating them within the narrative as it unfolds. There are lots of films that explore the process of their own construction within the narrative. Orson Welles' F for Fake is a docudrama all about con men and hoaxes and trickery, and that bleeds into the DNA of the craft. It constantly reminds you that you're watching something that's been manipulated, edited, bent to the will of the filmmaker, an ironic and repeated insistence about how everything you're watching is real.
During the next hour, everything you'll hear from us is really true and based on solid facts.
We are constantly presented with images of Welles doing magic tricks, creating illusions, dangling this idea of authenticity in front of us, all set against the backdrop of those who make a living through deception. Exit Through the Gift Shop is another film that tiptoes across a similar thematic line, in so much that I can't ever actually be 100% sure that what I'm watching is real. Is this an authentic documentary observing how the corporate world of art welcomes the sort sort of shallow work produced by the likes of Mr. Brainwash, or is the whole thing a satirical hoax? This may seem like an obvious point, but as an audience we are constantly being misled and lied to by filmmakers in order to better communicate their story through the use of clever editing, visuals, and sound. But what makes Mr. Organ so special, in my opinion, is that it feels like a complete inverse of this relationship. Of course, it will still use the aforementioned nuts and bolts of filmmaking trickery to tell its story, but on this occasion, both the filmmaker and the audience fall into a rabbit hole of not knowing what is and isn't real. A narrative built around the director attempting to make sense of the different realities presented by his own documentary subject. Organ, just like a filmmaker or storyteller, spins reality to remain in control of his own narrative.
There's nothing more irksome if someone is controlling the narrative, trying to control the narrative when you're the person who should be doing it. Because there's a difference between you not being able to prove something is true and me being able to prove that it's false.
And as a result, this film becomes one of the best deconstructions of gaslighting I have ever seen.
And if it is my key, then he's either fucking stolen it somehow, which is makes me sound crazy. Like if I told anyone this, if that key opens my house, if I explain the situation to anyone, it makes me sound like I've lost the plot.
As I've said previously, Mr. Organ begins in a very similar fashion to that of Tickled, a quirky and somewhat comical investigation into extortionate car clamping. But the dark turn this particular narrative takes after the practice is outlawed leads us into completely new territory. Instead of focusing on the unraveling of a mystery a la Tickled, the documentary takes a sudden shift of emphasis towards Farrier's relationship with Mr. Organ. It's a clear illustration of how someone can lose both power and control in a relationship.
I'm lying awake thinking about Michael Organ. Mike, when I open my eyes, I'll see him staring back at me through the gap.
This happens almost immediately once the initial pitch that we're sold at the start of the film comes to an end. When Farrier takes the sign of a now closed antique store linked to the clamping epidemic as a memento, the film suggests that Organ locates his home address, trespasses, retrieves said sign, and pulls him into court for theft.
Because those signs vanished into thin air, I can't give them back. And I'm ordered to pay nearly $3,000. For these.
Farrier is dragged to a court hours from his home and kept there as Organ talks and talks. He's essentially a prisoner until Organ decides to call it a day. Perfect foreshadowing of what's to come. The theme of Mr. Organ seems to be this repeated sentiment of power and dominance.
It's why he thrived clamping cars. It was never about the money. It was about physically trapping people so he could torment them for hours.
By establishing testimony with other individuals who articulate similar unpleasant experiences with Organ, the film cleverly makes us aware of the red flags as Farrier falls into the same trappings.
Michael knows I'm making a film about him, and I think he wants to be a part of it. So me and Michael, well, we start to hang out.
With the film's dependence on Organ's participation, Farrier is at the mercy of his subjects and becomes a prisoner within his own documentary. The film can't end until Farrier is given material that is important or substantial. Right from the get-go, we get a hint that the film won't be conducted on Farrier's terms.
He wears you down by talking for hours on end about absolutely nothing.
It's just a pointless exercise in talking to him. Like, you can't crack him. He's better than me.
Our first exposure to Organ is chaotic and disarming, constantly deflecting to a relevant conversation as the filmmakers try to get ready and prep for their interview. And the normal expectations of how a documentary should work continue to shift in peculiar ways. Not only is Farrier's privacy brought into question when his address is exposed, but he is put into a position where he must question his own reality and friendships when Organ announces that he has a key to Farrier's house. It's It's the first time I've seen a film where the documentary subject seems to know more about the filmmaker than vice versa. Farrier has spoken about the impossibility of editing this film, digging for relevancy in hours of unusable footage. I think there's something like 100 hours of raw material. And in a scene where Farrier, confirmed via a Q&A, is on the phone to a producer of the film, he hits a breaking point. He wants to drop the film completely, but due to a mix of financial interests, victims, and contributors being promised their story would be told, and to a certain extent the filmmaker's own ego, Farrier is trapped within the filmmaking process until he makes sense of what this film even is.
But I'm literally trapped with him because I have to make a film, right?
Yeah.
So there's no out except to spend more time with him until something magically happens. Like, I feel like I fucked up in like pitching the film in the first place.
It's an incredibly open and transparent look into what goes through the mind of a documentary filmmaker, something I have only ever personally seen once before in Free Solo, where the filmmakers and friends of the main contributor were forced to consider whether or not the film itself is perpetuating and creating danger where it might otherwise not exist.
And that's been the dilemma that this whole production has faced, right, from the beginning.
Our being there is always going to change things. What made the big difference for me is that he did turn around last year. He didn't feel the pressure to have to do it because we were there.
I.e., would this be happening if not for the cameras? In the case of Free Solo, the answer to that question is more ambiguous, but in the case of Mr. Organ, it's pretty clear Farrier does not want to be here and subjecting himself to this.
It's frustrating spending all this time with you because you do continuously lie about everything.
No,
and I mean everything.
4 visual chunks make up the main structure of Mr. Organ, which seems to be the hotel, the bank building, the interviews, and this street outside of the bank that they often conversate on. Considering this film took nearly a decade to make on and off, that's very limited screen time with Organ, which probably tells you something about Farrier's headspace during the production. It's a really fascinating watch. You can see the process from start to finish of someone being worn down and exhausted by constant gaslighting and an onslaught of contradicting information. It is almost a form of psychological terrorism.
The Germans have that term, dark mind, that people get a satisfaction from spreading misery or seeing somebody in some form of what they see as crisis.
Farrier finally makes sense of what is real and fake at the climax of the film, in a revelation that I won't spoil in this video. Not only does it act as a bookend to the narrative, but as a validation for what Farrier has been through, a confirmation that he isn't crazy, the sort of closure afforded to very few people in similar situations. However, living this moment vicariously through Farrier in the final moments of the runtime is incredibly satisfying, almost euphoric.
You live in, is it Ponsonby?
I'm in Ponsonby.
Yeah, he's been round your house, sneaking round your house.
So how did you know that he'd been to my house?
Because he's talked all about you and said that he's onto you. Apparently he's even got a key to your house.
Yeah, he does have a key to my house.
Yes.
The film also does a great job at illustrating how one can fall into the orbit of the type of person depicted in Mr. Organ. We see this through multiple contributors, Farrier himself, and as the film subtly suggests, Gillian, Organ's current person of interest, I suppose. It's difficult for Farrier to get a word alone with Gillian, and anytime he does, you could cut the tension with a knife.
Could I ever talk to you just on your own, just to get your take on everything?
Well, not at the moment, I can't.
Because I feel I've talked to Michael a lot, but I'd love to talk to you at some point, if you're open to that.
Well, not at the moment, not today.
I've seen a few reviews of Mr. Organ that complain it's anticlimactic, a film revolving around an individual who isn't exactly a master criminal, ultimately amounting to very little. But that's exactly why I think it works so well, because when someone doesn't appear outwardly menacing or aggressive and you view the situation from a distance, it's tempting to question why and how someone is allowing themselves to be treated in that way. And I think this is why the small-scale small-scale nature of Mr. Organ that some are so disappointed by is exactly why others in similar situations feel so validated. David Farrier is an incredibly empathetic filmmaker. He looks to the margins of society and examines people in a way that doesn't feel hyperbolic or sensational. Mr. Organ isn't for everyone, but if you appreciate and accept what it's trying to do and how it forces the filmmaker to reflect upon his own rationale for making the film in the first place, then I think you'll come away feeling like it was a pretty valuable experience. Hey, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a like and consider subscribing. Hopefully have some more videos coming out soon. Until then, bye.